Everyone. Welcome to our Conversations for Change event hosted by United Way of King County's Changemakers Group. My name is Kayleen Burnett, and I serve on the United Way's Changemakers Committee, and we're really excited to have you here with us today. At United Way, we begin all of our events with an acknowledgement of the land that we're on. And while this is a virtual event, the United Way of King County's office is located in downtown Seattle on Coast Salish land. Please take a moment to read our land acknowledgement statement and reflect on your relationship with the land that you're on and its people. I mentioned that this event is hosted by the Changemakers Group. That's United Way's affinity group for anyone who wants to be a part of meaningful change in our community and to help address some of the critical local issues that we're facing today. Today, we shine a spotlight on the issue of housing inequity and preventing homelessness. Over the next hour, we'll have the opportunity to chat with two individuals who are closely connected with this issue to help us learn more about homelessness in our community and why we believe that preventing people from losing their homes is the best way to tackle homelessness. This is an interactive conversation. So instead of presenting our speakers with a list of questions, we're looking for you to help us shape this conversation based on what you're curious about. So I'm encouraging everyone to use the chat to post your questions for the speakers through the event, and we'll do our best to infuse them throughout the program. Got it? All right. Now it's time to welcome our speakers. Gordon McHenry Jr., CEO and President of United Way of King County, and Shkëlqim Kelmendi, the founder and executive director of Housing Connector.
Great. Thank you, Kaylin, and welcome, Shkëlqim, and welcome all of you who've chosen to join us today for this conversation. Really appreciate it. And to Kaylin's point, we do want this to be interactive. I've got some questions I'm going to pose to Shkëlqim to get us started, but really want this to be a part of all of us talking about an issue that is, very, very important to this region. So at United Way, we're working side by side with communities to build an equitable future for everyone. And that includes ensuring everyone has access to resources, quality education, and a safe place to call home. Let's think about that last one, a safe place to call home. So we know that, homelessness is a very large issue. It's a challenging one. We believe that responding to our county's homeless problem requires a holistic, a multifaceted effort that takes many agencies, organizations, and stakeholders working side by side and doing what each one does best. And as you heard from Kaylin, at United Way of King County, we believe that the best way to tackle homelessness is to prevent people from losing their homes in the first place. So in today's conversation with Shkëlqim, we'll hear more about our work. You'll hear more about our work, in rental assistance, upstream eviction prevention, to help families stay in their homes right here in our community. So to get started, would love to ask Shkëlqim, who is a friend, and we've worked together in a couple different capacities over the past decade, it seems. He's also serves on our United Way board, and really appreciate that service. He is the founder and leader of the Housing Connector. So Shkëlqim, can you start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself, about Housing Connector, and why is housing and homelessness such a passion area, a focus area for you?
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. Hey, everyone. Glad to be in the space with you, and thanks for taking time to connect. Excited for the conversation. As you could probably tell, Gordon, and based on my name, it's not a traditional name. So really, my personal journey starts in Eastern Europe. I'm originally from Kosovo. It's a small country out in the Balkans. And in the late 90s, when I was growing up there, war broke out in the country. And so my journey really starts there. And after the war, escaping as a refugee and being fortunate to be relocated here in the United States, specifically in Dallas. In that time frame, my family experienced not only what it's like to be homeless, not as a refugee who's in camps and in transition, but also what it means to not even have a country of your own. Because at that point, Kosovo wasn't even recognized. When we came to the United States, one of the things that was so incredible was the amount of support that the community provided our family. We had nothing, we had no rental history, we had barely any income, and folks really opened doors and opportunities for us that allowed us to kind of have the American dream. And so for me, a lot of my motivation for the work that I do is thinking about that and what my family received, and thinking about how do I create those same opportunities for other families. And for me, try to do it at scale. And so my background is actually not in housing. I try to tell everyone that would listen to me, I know very little about housing. So take this whole conversation with that caveat. My background's in economics. And so when I was working here in Seattle a few years ago after I moved from Dallas, and seeing the issue around homelessness, I wanted to figure out a new way to address this issue. And for me, also thinking about not boiling the ocean, but thinking about how do we take a very clear segment of the problem and try to solve it and be really focused on it. And what that was for us, Gordon, was this issue that we kept seeing, which is a lot of families unable to find housing because of barriers like their credit score or past eviction or criminal history. And so we set out to solve this problem by working with property owners and managers in the community, and in a sense, providing them an insurance product so that they would eliminate those barriers and open their doors to folks in the community. The idea here was, how do we tap into the existing housing stock and make it more accessible and eliminate these barriers so we can get folks housed? And so since 2019, we started here in Seattle, have expanded to Denver, Dallas, Portland, and we've connected over 6,800 folks to housing. And just as importantly, if not more, we've kept those folks housed. And we can talk a little bit about the learnings around prevention, but for me, that's one of the biggest things is how we keep people from ever experiencing homelessness needs to be the priority.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's incredible. So that gives us some insight in how you've named it Housing Connector. So it sounds like that, there is this intentionality between getting landlords who are in the business providing rental space with certain segments or people in our community. And is that accurate? And what is it that you do to increase that relationship or to strengthen that relationship?
Yeah, you bet. You made a comment about the name. When I was starting this and it was a team of one, didn't have a lot of capacity to be creative about names. So we went with a very pragmatic and simple, which was, we're trying to connect people to housing, so let's name it Housing Connector. But to your point, one of the things that I think has been really unique about our work is us taking the time to understand the business drivers for properties. And look, whether you agree with the way, whether tenant laws or protections or how landlords operate, like we can have a separate conversation. But at the end of the day, our country has decided that the best way we're going to address housing insecurity is by relying on the private market. And that is because we've invested the majority of our funding in vouchers through HUD. And so we knew that we have to figure out a way to get private landlords to be a part of the solution. And so what we did, Gordon, was we said, okay, we know that every landlord wants their unit filled, rent paid, their property not damaged, and they all want healthy and safe communities. So let's design solutions to address those 4 business drivers. And we feel like if we can do that, they'll eliminate those barriers and make their units more accessible. And by the way, make these barriers that often tend to be more problematic for our BIPOC community, make them obsolete. And what I would say is in the 4 years that we've done this, that's proven to work. And we've have over 2,100 properties that have said, yes, we want to be a part of the solution. That's about 140,000 units in their portfolio. And again, it's kind of like artificially generating housing access just by using the existing stock.
Great, great. Well, let's dive a little bit into one of the statistical and human challenges right in front of us. So in the 4 years that Housing Connector's been in existence, in the 3.5 to 4 years that the King County Regional Homeless Authority has been in business, we now see that, at least based on the most recent point in time count, that there were more than 16,000 people unhoused, either in shelters or sleeping outside in King County this year. That's about a 23% increase than the prior count in 2022. What are you seeing as the reasons for this increase? Even though we have success in some areas, we still have an increase in the number of people being challenged with stable housing.
Yeah, I mean, what a discouraging statistic. Let's just call a spade, right?
Mhm.
And I'll be honest, I see folks on the call that do this work every single day, who are ending homelessness for families every single day, and it is tough to then see that number go up. Um, I think look, when we look at the macro factor from an economics perspective, we know that the single biggest correlation from homelessness is rent prices and the scarcity of housing. And so one of those challenges is the fact that Seattle and King County is a really expensive place to live, and it continues to be more expensive. And I think there was some, COVID kind of skewed some of the data and suppressed some of the eviction numbers and challenges with the protections. But I think what we've seen this year is kind of a back to reality, which again, I'm sad to say it's a bit of a bleak reality there, which is cost of living is going up, folks have fewer options, and therefore we're seeing those numbers go up. And then when you build the fact that, again, the number of units that are affordable is very scarce. You can ask any case manager out there doing this work. It is hard to find units for folks. So I would say that's probably the biggest piece. Again, like I don't want to get into, because it's not our space to get into like the methodology of how we've addressed it. But what I would say is what this number should tell us is that we cannot wait for people to be in crisis for us to start addressing the issue of housing security. If you wait
Right.
for them to be in crisis, it's too late. And yes, we can make an impact, but it's so much harder and it's an uphill battle.
Right. Right. And I think for our team at United Way, where we do rental assistance, we've been proud to be a large provider of rental assistance in partnership with the city and the county. We do eviction prevention in partnership with the Housing Justice Project, which
Yeah.
is a program of the King County Bar Association. So folks who don't have income or a lot of income can get legal representation, and then we and our partners can provide case management or outreach and supportive services to folks, even as they wrestle with an eviction, but represented by a lawyer, and of course can help pay
Yeah.
down. The key thing is help pay down past rent, and also provide a pathway for future rent to get that stable. And
What's
so I
interesting
think.
though, sorry to interrupt you, Gordon.
Mm,
I think what's interesting though is y'all were doing that. United Way was doing that even before COVID, like before it became a kind of mainstream thing with the Housing Justice Project. I'm just curious, like from your perspective, like what made you see this problem before everyone else was talking about it and decide to invest in that?
Some people know that I'm a recovering lawyer, which means I had a practice of I'm a licensed attorney, inactive, had a practice of law. We had a board member, Fred Rivera, who's actually still on the board. He used to be at Perkins Coie, now he's at the Seattle Mariners, and so he was very much aware of the human services work that United Way was doing, direct service and with some nonprofit partners. And he was also very much aware of the lawyers who were providing pro bono for free representation. And Fred connected the dots, was like, yes, you've got the lawyer who can make sure an eviction is legit, or if it's not, slow it down or stop it. But the lawyer did not have money to deal with a situation where, yeah, the eviction is legit. It's unfortunate. And the reason the eviction is happening is because the tenant has been unable to pay rent over a multiple period of time. And so he connected the dots and said, let's
Yeah.
get the lawyers and United Way and its partners together and make this into a program where you get legal representation, and you also have a human services professional who has access to cash to work with the lawyer to negotiate the rent. And what we found, for folks who are listening, is what Skelltram found is that there are a lot of landlords who they're in this to make money. It's a business, and they want renters to stay with them. And so we're dealing with renters who are not problematic. They just don't have enough money to pay the rent in a high cost market. And if you can talk to the landlord and get them to see that there's a path forward, those landlords are very supportive and excited to keep the renter, keep renting to that family or to that individual. And so uh, I think a lot of that was just a recognition that, as we said earlier, it takes a holistic approach to deal with something as challenging. as housing instability, especially in a high cost market before COVID, continues to be a high cost market, and one where, and we can talk about this today, there are significant disparities in wealth, in income, certainly in wealth. And oftentimes you find those disparities are based upon race, ethnicity, and geography. And that is something that is also challenging in our community. And Skeleton, I just want to ask, have you and your team found that you're dealing with racial inequities and geographic inequities as you do this work here in Greater King County?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the ways that, look, it was I wish I could say, like, when we started this, one of the things was to say, like, hey, we want to make the system more equitable. That wasn't necessarily what I was thinking at the time, just to be really candid. But what it's kind of the positive externality of our work has been that we're seeing increased access to housing for our BIPOC neighbors. So 2/3 of the households we've housed so far identify as BIPOC. In Dallas, that number is actually closer to 90%, which is incredible. And so we're seeing that this is an issue not just in Seattle and King County, but it's an issue in Denver and Dallas. And I think one of the things that I've realized in this work, Gordon, is, we talk about redlining. And for folks that don't know redlining, this was, a policy decision that was by choice put into place decades ago. But there's kind of modern forms of redlining that creep up. And so if you think about the mechanisms that we choose to determine whether a renter, whether an applicant is in a sense safe enough to rent a unit, we're using systems that are riddled with bias and institutional racism. So one of the main ways is we look at credit scores as a, first of all, I can talk to you about how much I hate credit scores in general, but credit scores are a direct connection to the financial system, which again, we know is often shutting doors on our BIPOC neighbors to be able to access, whether it's banking, whether it's lines of credit, whatever it may be, which then directly impacts your ability to access housing. Similar when we think about involvement in the criminal justice system. And now that is a key factor in utilization. And so you're taking all the issues from these other systems and they feed into our housing issue. And so naturally then what we see, Gordon, is we see higher rates and higher representation in our homelessness population and folks experiencing severe poverty in our BIPOC community. And like, it's a shame, but we shouldn't be surprised because we're using institutions, as I mentioned, that are riddled with racism and bias to determine housing. And so then we get the results that we get, and we have to change the system if we ever expect to have a different outcome here. And I think that's one of the cool things, as I mentioned, a positive externality of our work has been that us making these levers of screening criteria, making some of them obsolete, like all of our properties waive credit score, they all accept evictions, they all accept certain levels of criminal history. In a sense, what we're doing is making these levers of discrimination obsolete, because now a landlord doesn't even have the choice to pull that credit lever to determine the worthiness of somebody accessing a home. And I think we need to think about, like, because Housing Connector is not going to scale to meet the need of the entire country. So we need to think about how do we then determine policy changes to be able to have a wider net that supports and addresses problems like that.
It's interesting because, of course, during COVID, there were some big and bold policy changes that were made. One of which, of course, was moratoriums on eviction, and then moratoriums on evictions during adverse weather. And so we do. And that was our opinion, that was the right thing to do. But I also felt like it was reactive. And I think what you're saying, Shkëlqim, is we need to continue to get people in rooms to come up with additional ways to really increase stability and to decrease barriers to obtaining rental and to staying in a rental. And so I really appreciate you naming that. I'm going to just
some
check.
productive rooms, Gordon.
Yeah,
Let's call ourselves out a little bit. Not necessarily the Seattle rooms where we like to sit around and talk about a problem oftentimes. And so I think that's the thing, is like, to your point around the crisis piece, like what was cool, I mean, okay, Mike, I can't believe I'm saying this, cool about COVID. There's nothing cool about COVID. What was enlightening about COVID was that when we were in a true crisis mode, you saw how quickly we took action, how quickly we worked together, and actually made immediate impact. And one of the problems that I have when we talk about homelessness and we talk about the crisis of homelessness is it is kind of lip service to the word crisis, because we're not actually acting oftentimes as if it is a true crisis. And what COVID showed us is that when we treat this problem like the crisis it is, we can actually move the needle much quicker. And so to me, one of the things that came out of COVID was actually hopeful insight, which was we can do this. We just have to have the conviction that this is important and urgent enough to do something new about it.
Right, exactly. We're going to turn to some of the questions that are in the chat. And I know one of the ones that I just first saw was, policy and systems change and what more can be done. The concept of rental assistance should not be, rare or unique.
Yeah.
It kept a lot of people in their homes during a really hard time of COVID, and that money, a lot of the money was federal money, and now
Yep.
we're relying upon state and local, and so it's a much smaller amount. But we need rental assistance, and when I'm talking to my colleagues of United Ways, like in the Bay Area, LA, Southern California, Denver, up and down the West Coast, we're all struggling with urban populations, high cost markets,
Yeah.
where there's a churn of folks who are barely housed, find a way to stay in their housing for a little while, get pushed out, have to move, continue to struggle. And so we need to be having serious, to Skelchum's point, serious conversations about increased rental assistance, at the local and state level. We also need to have more of a holistic approach. I saw somebody say, "How can we help seniors, get housed?"
And stay housed, because it's the
And
problem
stay
that's
housed.
it is the problem that's coming.
Yeah, it is
I mean, it's
exactly.
already here, but it's about to get a lot worse because I feel like we're not
Yeah,
actually paying enough attention to that specific population.
yeah, it's fixed income and also higher medical cost, with or without insurance. And so that's a challenge in our area. We also have the fact that some folks know about HUD vouchers, and Skelton mentioned vouchers, and the wait list for vouchers is multiple years, and so it just, these are like flashing red lights that say we are in dire straits, and anyone who thinks, oh, we survived COVID, no, we're still in an acute crisis. Let me check a few other, and Scott can go ahead and weigh in if you have some thoughts. I'm going to check the chat for other questions.
Yeah, so Margaret had a great resource that they put in there around homelessness is a housing problem. It's a great read around just to get
Yes.
an understanding, and talks about holistically like why we're in this issue. Yeah, but Gordon, I think to your point, there was actually a lot of things at the federal level that, as we think about some of the other benefits for families that unfortunately have been rolled back, that demonstrated the value and the impact they had when we think about reducing the number of folks that are experiencing hunger, poverty, and I think it's a shame that those have been pulled back. One of the interesting things is for folks that have heard of the author Matthew Desmond. He's the author that wrote Evicted and has a new book called Poverty by America. And actually, it was really cool. United Way brought him out here to speak, which was really awesome. But one of the things he talked about that was really interesting for me was that in America, we actually don't have an issue of abuse or overutilization of our safety nets. We actually have the issue of underutilization. So think about that for a second, right? Like a lot of the times what people talk about is like, oh, like people are just abusing these. And when you actually look at the data, we're realizing how much money goes unutilized in our system that are set to support families, specifically low-income families. And so as we think about prevention, and if you shift away a little bit from homelessness response, one of the issues is we've created these insane bureaucratic processes for folks to access the benefits that are designed for them. And I'll think about, to give you an anecdote, Gordon, like I think about my own journey, as I mentioned, when we came to the US as refugees. Like, look, my parents, as like most immigrant parents, are obsessed with education. It was like you go to school, you do good in school, and that is the most important thing. But oftentimes, Gordon, what they had to do was they actually would take me out of school to go to meetings and appointments, whether it was for food stamps or Medicare, or whatever it may be, because I was the only one that really spoke English at that point.
Yeah. Yep.
And so again, if we think about like some of the barriers that folks are having to go through and jump through to access these benefits, while also we're asking them to have a full-time job to work their way out of this problem, like, and then we're surprised that folks are struggling. And I think, again, like I tell my team this all the time, the mechanisms and processes in place are designed to get the exact results we're getting. And if we want to see different results, we have to change the inputs and we have to change the processes. And that's another area that I think from a policy perspective, we should really analyze and evaluate and see what we can do differently to increase the access point to these benefits.
I remember Shkëlqim, a conversation a couple of years ago, as we were, well, maybe it's a few years ago now, rolling out. There was Obamacare, so expanded, and then health,
Yeah.
and then Affordable Care Act, expanded Medicaid in certain states, which is Washington State, and we all did a really big push to get people signed up right here in King County.
Yeah.
Thousands of people we got signed up for Medicaid. And to Shkëlqim's point, they were not aware that they were entitled to basically free and low cost quality health care. And so then we're doing all this great work, and there's this interest around signing up for Medicaid, and really wise and inspired, passionate legislators said, what we really need to do is really need to get the medical profession to start writing scripts that say what this patient needs is safe, stable housing. And since I'm a physician and I'm saying this patient needs safe, stable housing, that should be funded in part by Medicaid dollars, because that is the prescription needed. And so then right in the middle of COVID, we've got folks who are, going out of, shelters and into hotel rooms. And then we all act shocked when doctors go, oh my goodness, these folks are so much healthier physically, emotionally, psychologically, because they have their own apartment or their own basic hotel room. And so to Shkëlqim's point, some of these approaches are right in front of us. We just have to have the willpower to say we want to make a difference. We want to be bold. We want to use some common sense, and we want to take advantage of some things that are right in front of us. And so that gives me hope. And these kinds of conversations today with people leaning in. And I guess the last thing I would say for those of folks who may not, if you're not tracking, homelessness a lot or housing instability, you will hear numbers like 12,000 on any given night, 16,000. And I've had conversations with people that have to help them understand this is not the same 16,000 people. The people that were counted in January that made up that 16,000, there's going to be a different number of people in May or June if we did that same count. So some people think, oh, well, it's the same folks, we need to work. It's like, no, we have people cycling in and out of instability and homelessness every single day in the region. And so the number of people that are struggling with this is well beyond 50,000 people. We just happen to count 16,000 people on a night in January.
Yeah, I mean, but that's also like, I mean, it's a good example, not to call you and I out here, but I mean, a little bit. Like the pull of the homelessness conversation is so strong,
right,
that even when we're wanting to talk about upstream, like it pulls you into that conversation because it's the crisis in front of us.
Right.
And I think one of the things that I will say, like we do a really good job at in America is like focusing on the crisis, and not necessarily on the prevention, because it's not as flashy, it's often not as like right in your face where you see it. And the analogy I've been thinking about a lot in trying to communicate what we're trying to do at Housing Connector, because honestly, like I think we're going to change our mission to say like our new mission needs to be that we need to solve homelessness before it ever happens. Because waiting till it happens is almost too late, as I mentioned. And so one of the things I've been thinking about, Gordon, is like, how do you help folks that are not in this space see the importance of this? And you brought up the healthcare system. And the way I like to explain this is the homelessness system is the emergency room. It is the emergency room. The prevention work is your primary care doctor. And our goal is to invest more, focus more on connecting folks to the primary care doctor so they never have to go to emergency room because they had a broken foot or they had a whatever it may be that has now been untreated and led to the point of crisis. And somebody's talking about the prevention costs less for everyone. Yeah, Sam, 100%. Just to put some data on that, it's estimated that just to manage homelessness costs about $35,000 a year. That's over $30 billion in the United States. Whereas if we go upstream and try to prevent it, it is a fraction, literally a fraction of that number. And so this is not just the right humanitarian approach. This is the right fiscal approach. If you want to say like, hey, we want to be like fiscally responsible, then you should work on prevention because that is also the fiscally responsible thing. And I think one of the things that we need to think about is, again, tying all of this together and not having all these pieces in silos. And so for the folks that are doing the direct homelessness response, look, they're going to tell you
trying to get back in.
It's okay, Gordon. I thought you were like, I'm done with Shkëlqim. I'm signing off. I'm over this. And so I think for us, it's really, again, thinking about this and changing the narrative and how we're investing these dollars, where we're investing. And then one of the things I'd love to also dive into, Gordon, that I think is important is thinking about how we use information and data in identifying who needs these resources or who is on the brink of falling into instability and deliver that service just in time to be able to stabilize them and, again, divert them away from evictions and the path towards homelessness. And I see, one of the.
I was just going to say we've lost Gordon for a second.
That's okay. That's okay.
So if you want to keep talking, go for it.
Yeah, I'm here for this all day. Because this is this is, again, one of my big pet peeves on this. So one of the things I would love to just provide some context on this is, again, as we're thinking about the conversation for change, I think one of the things we need to do a better job in our community here locally is also not just be so paralyzed as a broader community around the fact that we're not seeing the needle move in homelessness. And I think there's a lot of really good creative ways that folks are addressing this. There was a question earlier, and I apologize that I don't remember who had asked it, but it was around, if you're in other states, what are you seeing that is working? I think, that is working in other places. And there are solutions that other cities are trying that are having an impact. And so, one of those in the prevention world that's been actually very interesting. It's small, and welcome back, Gordon. It's small, but it's I think impactful. Is working with property owners and managers to actually split rent into two parts. And again, this to me actually makes a lot of just pragmatic sense. Most of us, not all, but most of us get paid in 2 paychecks or every 2 weeks. But the problem when it's when it comes to rent is the way rent is structured is all of rent is due on day one, with a small grace period there of a couple of days, right? And so what we often find with families is they basically put their entire first paycheck towards rent, and then are barely making it, trying to figure out how they pay for food, transportation, whatever it may be, till they get paid again. And so an interesting thing that this group, a partner of ours, is doing called Flagstone is working with properties to split up rent into 2 parts. Have half of it due on the 1st, half on the 15th. And that small change that is really just around the timing of cash flow has increased on-time payments at these properties that they're testing it by over 8%. And again, right, so if you think about it, folks are wanting and willing to pay. The issue is they just don't have the funding and the cash. And if you can find creative ways like this to make it easier for them to make these payments, what we're seeing and what the data suggests is you are going to get better results, which allows them to have the stability, allows the property to generate their revenue and maintain their operating costs. So it's really a win-win situation. And again, that's a small tweak that I think we could work to implement locally, and also from a policy perspective, make that an option for folks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shkëlqim. Can you hear me? Am I back?
You're back.
Great. I lost the signal, and so apologize for stepping away. Appreciate you helping us with that analogy about the homelessness is like the emergency room, and yet we're not dealing with it. And I think that was one thing I was going to try to add, if you didn't already cover it, is that there is significant emotional and psychological trauma that happens to families who are dealing with housing instability, one time, and certainly when it happens over and over again. And so there is the power of knowing that in our case, if you at the point of eviction, you have a lawyer to represent you, but there's also the power of knowing that you've got a community of folks who see you, see your family, and like, we're here to work with you to get you stable. And we learned during COVID, of course, when you were doing 9 months back rent, 3 months of future rent, that gave a lot of stability, and it resulted in a much healthier community when they have that kind of support. And I think that's one of those qualitative aspects to this really challenging issue that people don't focus upon. And if you just look at the numbers, you become numb to just how hard it is on families. And that's whether it's seniors, whether it's people raising a family, it's on young people who, and a little bit to your description of not knowing where that meal is going to come from, not knowing if they're going to have to move again, wondering why mom and dad or grandparents are acting in a way. What they're doing is trying to protect the young person from the reality that things are not good. And so I think for us at United Way and Housing Connector and other partners in this work, we really want to focus on the policy issues, but we don't want to lose sight of the humanity that's really at play here. And this is we've got to do better as a community.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, Gordon, on that rent relief, because first of all, for folks that don't know, right, there was millions and millions invested in rent relief, and it made a huge difference. Like, it kept so many folks housed. And I have a little bit of an issue with how it was rolled out, just so we're not here agreeing with each other. I'm going to give you an example of this. Just again, because at the end of the day, we have our personal stories, and
Sure.
For folks that think that people are not trying everything possible to self-address the issue that they're facing, you're out of touch. You would be doing the same thing, and folks are doing the same thing. And if you don't think that, that's total BS. And for example, Albanians, which that's what I am, we are the proudest humans ever. And we will literally try to self-service and try to figure it out ourselves until the point that we are in ruins. And that is a honorable thing, but it is not a healthy thing.
Mm.
And so for me, one of the things that I keep thinking about is, if I put myself in this position, I'm I'd be doing everything possible to figure it out. If we as a community can figure out a way to reach folks that are on that brink of struggling and trying to figure it out, and infuse a resource, whether it's a small amount of rent, whether it's a 0% loan, whatever it may be, to help them in that position, we address a lot of that trauma, a lot of that stress, a lot of the fact that now folks are having to work 2-3 jobs and are away from their kids. And what that takes, though, is us having better insight and data. And so going back to my comment of one of the issues I have with the rent relief, during COVID, it was critical that we got money out the door, and we did. And United Way was incredible at that. And one of the cool things about what United Way has done is, as that program as rent relief has gone on, United Way has started iterating and thinking about, how do we do this better? How do we get early indication of when someone is behind on rent? How do we deliver that funding faster? And just to give you another anecdote, we've been talking to the city of Newark, New Jersey. And they spent, when we were talking to them, one of the things that they mentioned was they were really proud of how much money they got out the door. It was a couple $2 billion. And my question was, that's amazing, but I'm not actually interested in how many dollars you got out the door. I'm interested in how many families you served. And so for me, one of the things there was, when we asked that question, what we realized is they were spending over $12,000, Gordon, per family. And I was like, that's that's amazing for those families that got that $12,000. But to me, that's not okay. Because if we can figure out a way to use data, to use information, to have partnerships, to be able to offer this the moment somebody falls behind $200, $300, 1 month behind, and get them stabilized so that they're not falling 3, 4, 5 months behind, that's going to allow that capital, that resource, to go much further. And so one of the things that we've been thinking about is how do we work with property owners and managers? How do we work with, even let's say City of Seattle, where the city has investments in affordable housing. How do you get those properties to notify you and share data when folks are falling behind? How do you
Right.
get the utilities company to tell you as an early indicator when somebody's falling behind and then offer support proactively? And I think then we can stabilize folks before they fall into that trauma and the challenges of trying to self-resolve. And hopefully we can never have them go down the eviction path. And then just as and again, this is my personal view on this, but like, I think another positive aspect is it keeps the relationship between the resident, the family, and the property intact. And like y'all, like for anyone that has a landlord or whatever, like that's already a weird and like a power dynamic there. And if you can have a really good relationship there, like that's super important in folks just feeling comfortable in that space. And I think that's another just benefit that we don't think about enough when we have that early intervention.
Right, right. And I think that's really key. I'm glad you lifted that up, because folks who oftentimes are struggling with rent, they're connected to another part of our social and human services safety net. So it might be, somebody who's approaching a food bank, and that's the first part of the conversation.
Yeah.
But they're also struggling. Or it's we learned from our work in the community colleges, there are a lot of people in their upper 20s and 30s who are struggling, and the additional challenges. I'm paying for. I'm going to college so I can have a better career, and yet I'm struggling with food. I'm struggling with rent. The car broke down, and so we put together. We raised some money and put together flexible funds. So it wasn't like you had to qualify for food. It's just like, no, I have this financial issue that is likely to make me want to quit school. And it's just a 2-year program. And so it said, and part of that was they walked into an area we called the benefit hub, and there was a relationship there, and that person got to know them, trust them, and then they connected them to resources. And so I think a lot of what Shkëlqim's talking about is, for a lot of us, it's really how do we have this network that works to keep people informed and connected, even if your area is seniors. I don't do youth homelessness. Well, the seniors connected to, and I deal with food. Well, not housing, but the person, needs stable housing. And so I think we can get there. And I think the other part that Shkëlqim talked about with the Newark, New Jersey, is that we need local solutions. So, yes, let's advocate for more federal funding, but we need the flexibility to put it into play in a way that works best for the community of King County. And so that's something that we can also talk about, is going deeper in the solutions. Is the flexibility is really important. The money is important, but we need the flexibility, and you need that community of hope, a community of folks who are known and can be trusted by the renter, and easily accessible. Yeah.
And I think Gordon.
No, I was going to say I need some help probably with the questions in the chat, because I can't see them the way I'm set up at the moment.
Yeah, you bet. I can help on there as well, and try to bring it together. I think one thing just that I just want to elevate here, some of the cool things that for United Way, like one of the awesome pieces for me and why I like United Way is y'all have this kind of holistic view of what's happening in the community, and you're able to invest in what's working and also give ideas a chance. And one of the things that United Way allowed us at Housing Connector to do with some resources was basically create a system where, again, with that flexible response, where what we did was we basically put the burden on the property to notify us when people were falling behind on rent, because they have a business incentive to do so. We created a product and a mechanism to be able to get that data in real time. And then we were able to deploy services the moment somebody didn't pay. And what it allowed us to do is keep folks, again, with a 6,000 plus folks that we've connected to housing, keep them housed at a rate of less than $500 over 2 years. And it's why? Because we had early interventions, we had flexibility, and I think that's a really, again, what we're doing is not necessarily so special or unique, but it's just another example that there are creative ways. And then when we see those creative ways that are working and have the data behind them, how do we invest, scale them, and allow them to expand their impact?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, there's a question from, I believe, Marie around, can you touch on some common myths or misconceptions around people experiencing homelessness, especially around substance abuse and migration from other cities? I'll take the second piece, and Gordon, feel free to jump in on the first. The data is pretty clear on the migration from other cities, that number is incredibly low. That the majority of homelessness, and this is above 85 to 88%, if not over 90, is local. Folks are experiencing homelessness in the community that they lived and grew up in. And so I think that's more of a myth. And again, it's a nice little way to deflect responsibility as policy leaders and politicians oftentimes, but that's just not true. Gordon, do you want to take the first one a little bit around the misconception around substance abuse?
Yeah, I think there is, there's the whole issue of correlation and causality. And so folks who are homeless, folks who are struggling with housing stability are fundamentally laypersons stressed out and they're trying to cope. There is data that says once you've been homeless, you have an increased likelihood of having behavioral or mental health challenges. But I think the point is that the folks are dealing with homelessness and housing instability, and mental and behavioral health is one of the symptoms of that challenge. And so it is really important to step back and understand why that's occurring, or we say having co-occurring situation, and as opposed to saying no, that it's because of the mental or behavioral health that you are homeless. We find that it's more the former, that the housing instability, the homelessness has exacerbated their health situation, resulting in that kind of a situation and a need for help. And that also is a challenge for folks who are what we call re-entering society from juvenile justice and the criminal justice system. It is very, very hard. And fundamentally, they oftentimes are discharged into homelessness. Hey, you're getting out, and you're getting out with what you brought in or less, and best results. Or you are a young Shkëlqim and you're not with your family, you're in the foster care system, and you're either 18, 19, or 20, and hey, you're out of the system, no more state support, bye. And that is unhealthy, it is unrealistic, and it's not sustainable. And so that's why you have higher incidents. And then of course, it only takes one eviction, or the challenge with the credit score, the challenge with having a conviction, and you have more and more barriers to get that housing. And oftentimes the area where you want to live is not affordable. So then you're not in a community. And so I think we ask people to accept that this is a challenge, and that it's very complicated and complex, and that situations are different. And it's really about understanding where that person is, how to help them avoid hopefully the trauma in the first place, and to give them the support that is most meaningful for them to get it to a much more stable place, excuse me. And just, hey, one thing we wanted to do was, and let's use the chat function. If you're having this conversation and you're thinking about things, or things are crystallizing for you, what are some big takeaways? What are takeaways that this audience is experiencing or coming to grips with? And if you drop those into the chat, that'll be really helpful for us doing the work, and I think helpful for, again, having this conversation that's about change and about helping us to have a healthier and more equitable community right here in King County.
For sure. And Gordon, can I tell you just that, because one of the things on that, like humanizing the face of folks that are struggling, we had a situation in Dallas where we connected a third grade teacher, elementary teacher, to housing, and she was struggling to find housing because of her credit score. And there's something she said that really resonated with me, which was, why is it that people trust me to teach their kids, but they don't trust me to live in their apartment building? And I was just like, damn.
Yes.
I won't say what I want to say next, but like, right, that is such a problem. Like that is such a problem. And I think one of the things that we need to understand, especially in the prevention world, this is not this image that we have of folks that are, low income or homelessness that has been kind of drilled into our head. Like this is all of us.
Yeah.
Like unless you're like a billionaire on this call, all of us are closer to being and experiencing homelessness than we are to being billionaires. Like, so
Yep.
don't think that we're that far removed. And this is really folks in our community, folks that we know, folks on our teams that we don't talk about. And I think us having a bit more compassion and understanding there is going to be really critical in us addressing this, because the compassion fatigue that I'm seeing
Yes.
is part of the challenge in being able to solve this. Like, you know, I had somebody tell me, like, a vision is a clear mental picture of what could be, fueled by the conviction that it should be.
Mhm.
And for us, even if we have the clear mental picture of what could be, like, we're starting to lose the conviction that it should be. And that's
Yeah.
part of that problem, is because we're losing the humanity and the connection point of this
Mhm.
issue. And man, I hope that if you walk away with one thing, it's knowing that, like, this is a problem for all of us. And this is a problem for folks in your life, in my life, and it's not that far away. And we
Right.
need to treat it with the urgency and the compassion it deserves.
Yeah, I cannot add on to that. I think, and hopefully, the other takeaway is that, you know, it's in many ways it's an invisible problem in terms of folks who are dealing with housing stability, as distinct from being in a shelter or unsheltered. And so we have to um, have those conversations that are rooted in compassion, rooted in a much more powerful vision of what this community can be, because we are doing ourselves harm by defining our situation with housing stability and homelessness only based upon those who you happen to see or that one night count. And so that is the challenge. And of course, like we said, as I've said earlier, that for many in this community, um, for those of us who survived COVID, we wanted to be behind us, the economic dislocation, the health challenges, and the economic dislocation, those economic pressures are still weighing down and harming a significant portion of the King County community. One thing, we appreciate folks joining us, and please be aware of good work like the Housing Connector that's led by my friend Shkëlqim. Please be aware of our United Way work. I think we can show a slide, or they're going to show a slide, that we have some upcoming events. And also, we are a nonprofit, and we try to invest as much of our resources back into the community. So we hope that you'll find that United Way is an organization that you can trust with some of your precious funds. We're really focused on food, and on housing stability. And so if those make your heart beat, please consider investing in United Way. We have a couple events that are showing right now. Art Kits for Transformative Justice, it'll be hands-on engagement. And then of course, we have a convening by one of our affinity groups, happy hours and hellos. And this information is always at the website you see here. And so we'd encourage you to support United Way, show up, bring some folks, and I think we can know that we will work hard and we'll be successful at that vision that Shkëlqim really aptly described. Shkëlqim, I'll just pass Mike back to you to see if you have any closing comments, and then we'll encourage folks to get back to their day, hopefully inspired by some of the conversation today.
Yeah, no, thank you, Gordon. Thank you for just taking the time, y'all, to be a part of this, to listen in. Again, I think one of the things that I would just say is, yes, this is a big problem, but this is also a problem that we can solve, and we're doing it every single day. And what I hope folks walk away with is this idea and this knowledge that the best is really yet to come, that we are going to address this because we have no other choice. And we feel like, I'll talk about our team, like we feel like we have the conviction to make that difference. And as you're thinking about this and you're seeing this problem, the one thing I would encourage you to do is, again, speak truth to what's happening, call out the broader and more holistic challenges that our community and folks are facing. And then also just think about how you can find the positive opportunities out there. Look, like, it's just like, I think about this analogy of I'm not a motorcycle driver, but like, I guess for a motorcycle, where you look is where the bike goes. And sometimes with our mentality, if we're just focusing on the negative, that's where our energy goes. And I'm not here to be like this, like flowers and roses person by any means, But y'all, we also need to focus on the good. We need to focus on the positive that's happening and the change that's happening, and say, how do we double down on that? And that's what's going to elevate us to actually getting to that vision of a better place for everyone in our community.
Absolutely. Yes, compassion and action. That's what we need. And really proud of all of my team at United Way. Have great partners, Housing Connector. Thank all of you for joining us. We wish you well. And yes, we are making a difference. And with your support, we will continue and we'll grow that. So grow that impact. Thank you so much. Take good care. Look forward to having another conversation with you in the future.
Thanks, everyone.